Good evening. It's episode number 81. Today is Thursday, September 24th, 2020. Why we don't have 529s. This is the 39.6 Facebook Live Finance Show, also now streaming live to YouTube. It's the show that teaches high earners like yourself how to make your money work for you so you don't have to work for your money. We talk general investing, taxes, real estate, syndications, managing your household expenses like childcare, or even the car you drive. Today we talk about why we don't have 529s. One of our members in our 39.6 community Facebook group had asked, I see your portfolio, but I don't see any 529s. Do you just not count them? Truth is, we just don't have them. All right. Now, if you notice in other episodes, our portfolio is already super complicated. We have like 12 investment accounts, and that's only using one taxable account. We could easily have multiple more. Now, we also have a Roth IRA for our toddler, but we don't have any 529s. That would add some more complexity, another 2 more accounts. That's just one reason. And I'm trying to have fewer accounts. Okay, but the number one reason why we don't have 529 plans is because we live in Texas. Texas, even though it is, there's a word for this, when you read an anagram. It is an anagram for the word taxes, interestingly enough. There's no state tax, and we don't have local tax. We have sales tax, and we have property tax. There's no state tax. So one of the main reasons to use a 529 plan is to take a state tax deduction, especially if you're in a state like California, New York, New Jersey, where you have high state tax liability. There's often a limit how much state tax deduction you can take each year. Often people talk about, quote unquote, maxing out a 529. That's like impossible, except that they have some very super high limit of like maybe $400,000. Often when people talk about this, they're talking about maxing out the state tax deduction each year. Well, I max out the state tax deduction of $0 on a 529. So that's the number one reason. Why is that so important? Remember, if you're at the top tax bracket, and if you take a general stance that a range of asset allocations is going to get you to a similar overall outcome long term, then it doesn't necessarily matter if a little tiny slice is in stocks, bonds, cash, etc., because it's just a small portion of your portfolio or real estate. The biggest benefit is getting a tax break now to save you on tax so that tax savings can be invested. That is where the big advantage is. That's why a cash balance plan is so unbelievably powerful. Okay, so if you're in California and you're at the top tax bracket, 37%, and you're at the top state tax bracket, you're at like 13% state tax approximately. That's 50%. So on your marginal dollar, not your effective tax rate, but your marginal dollar, that's 50% income tax. I did a whole episode on you're not paying 50% income tax. You're not on all your money. But those last dollars, you certainly could be. Those are the best dollars to be putting in pre-tax so you can get half of them back. Okay, so it makes a ton of sense to get that state tax deduction, because if you don't get that state tax deduction, that money's gone permanently. Okay, it might not be a huge amount, but it's still extra money. And when you look at that extra money in terms of your rate of return, it gives a substantial boost to the return on your invested dollar that's guaranteed because it's tax savings was basically added on top of that. Okay. If there were a state tax deduction, 100% we would absolutely hit that state tax limit every time. Now, the second best reason to invest in a 529, actually, my first reason was why we don't have, first one would be if you have a state tax deduction. And the second reason, the best reason to have a 529 is to lock in a price. If you have a state that has a guaranteed price of tuition and it's very cheap price and you like it and you want to hedge against the risk of inflation with college costs over the past decades just going skyrocketing far above average inflation across other expenses, then it's a good way to hedge that risk. But then there's often strings attached into, where it's actually useful for. And then if you don't go there, what will you get in return if you don't choose to go to that school? I grew up in Michigan, and they had a program years ago called the MET, Michigan Educational Trust. I don't know if they still have some version of it, but I remember people back in the 80s, maybe early 90s, talking about being able to lock in a price for tuition in Michigan, and it could apply to any state school in Michigan. And from what it sounded like, at least in retrospect, it sounds like that was a pretty good deal. I mean, tuition went up a lot, and for example, University of Michigan's an excellent school, and you could lock in that price, whatever it was. Now, in Texas, we do have a program called the Texas Tomorrow Fund, or at least people call it that, although I think technically it has a slightly different name, but Texas Tomorrow Fund is, it's called Texas Tuition Promise Fund.com is the website. It says at the moment they are not allowing people to enroll. I don't know why. It's also called the Texas Guaranteed Tuition Plan. But you basically buy like credits based on current prices, and if you get enough credits, then they can apply for a certain amount of like credits for college. If the prices were super, super competitive and I were really worried about that, it would be something I would consider. But then you're basically investing kind of at a rate of return equal to the inflation rate of college tuition in that state. If it was a really great deal, then I'd be more incentivized, but not so much at this moment. Okay, so that's why we don't. There are some reasons why I've definitely considered it. One is just so that when we get gift money for the kids, we can just put it into the 529 and not have to worry about it. It's already taken care of and quote unquote set aside. And then we just put the money there. We don't have to try to keep track of what money is theirs, for example. Not that we get that much money. We try to avoid getting much money for the kids. But in some families, you have a lot of family members who want to give a lot of money. It's a great way to put that money aside, and you don't have to worry about touching it. And it's over there in their 529, basically in a trust for them. Okay. Now, asset protection is actually a reason to have a 529, something I've considered. And state laws vary with respect to how a 529 is protected from creditors. Ideally, you should have like a third-party trustee who's in charge of it, at least to the best of my understanding, to help maximize the likelihood that can be protected from creditors. But again, we're in Texas, and we have one huge advantage here in Texas, amongst many others, that your homestead is asset protected. So we can always pay down our house. We don't own our homestead outright. So we still have a lot of room, hundreds of thousands of dollars of more space to put equity into our homestead that is asset protected. Okay, and that money would be potentially more available by way of like a HELOC if we ever needed to have liquidity to utilize for other things. Okay, a 529 is illiquid to the people investing the money because you can't get that back. So some people overfund a 529 and put in like $70,000 or something all at once, like a lot of money. And they put that in there, and you can't just take it out for liquidity reasons. So it is illiquid to you, and there's a cost for that, right? Like, I don't really take money out from my house, but I can understand a time when that could be very useful if I'm trying to get a deal done, and having access to that would be beneficial. Trying to think of anything else here. That's really about it. There's another tax issue, which I'll probably just get into a different episode. But in the meantime, we're avoiding 529s, just to kind of make our lives a little simpler. Oh, and if we are putting in money post-tax, real estate is by far the more useful way to do that for us at this time, because when we invest in real estate, we can generate those negative K1s through real estate investing. And those negative K1s can translate into tax savings. And again, tax savings is where you get your biggest benefit if you're investing in general and you're at the highest tax bracket. So once that money goes into a 529, we can't use that money for real estate investments, which are much more favorable from a tax perspective and getting us those deductions. The more money we can have in real estate, the more money we can get those losses, and the more assets we can have that we can potentially, if I were to directly own something, roll on 1031 exchanges and basically never pay taxes on those assets. And we can still build our wealth and utilize that wealth to pay for college down the road. But on the taxable post-tax side, real estate is just a much more efficient way for us to get there, because those tax savings that we can get through real estate can be gigantic and really juice your returns while also having more liquidity, more access to that capital, because in the 529, we can't access it. So that's it for tonight's quick episode on 529s, episode number 81. Until tomorrow, this is simply for your entertainment, my entertainment, not legal, not accounting, not financial advice. Please contact your professionals certified in those areas to help you for your own decision. Until tomorrow, have a good one.